I never thought I'd end up in a war over my own house. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and this place, this cozy little colonial-style home in Connecticut, is where I've lived for over 3 decades. It's not just a house. It's my sanctuary, the place where I raised my son Daniel, celebrated holidays, mourned losses, and built memories that are etched into every creaking floorboard. But now it feels like a battlefield. Daniel, bless his heart, has always been my pride and joy. He's smart, ambitious, and successful. A corporate lawyer who works long hours but still manages to call me every Sunday evening. His wife, Cassidy Harlow, on the other hand, well, let's just say she's an acquired taste. She's glamorous, sharp-tongued, and determined to leave her mark on everything she touches, including my house. When they moved in temporarily because their new home was delayed due to construction issues, I tried to be welcoming. I really did. But there's something about the way Cassidy looks at my furniture, the same pieces I inherited from my mother, that makes me feel like I'm living in a museum she can't wait to tear down. At first I told myself it was nothing. Just small annoyances, the kind you brush off when you're trying to keep the peace. Cassidy started rearranging things without asking, moving my grandmother's china cabinet to make room for one of her sleek modern sideboards, replacing my curtains with neutral tones that sucked all the warmth out of the living room. Then came the comments. Oh, the comments. Margaret, don't you think it's time to update this place? Or, this wallpaper screams 1980s. Every word felt like a jab, but I bit my tongue. After all, they were only staying here temporarily, right? But then one evening, during dinner, Cassidy crossed a line. She looked at me with that smug smile of hers and said, "You know, Margaret, sometimes holding on to the past holds us back." That's when I realized she wasn't just talking about the house. She was talking about me. And maybe, just maybe, she had a point. But pride is a funny thing. It doesn't let you admit defeat even when you know you might deserve it. The tension finally boiled over one Saturday afternoon. Cassidy announced she'd hired a contractor to start renovating the kitchen. "It's outdated," she said, flipping through a glossy magazine filled with pristine white countertops and stainless steel appliances. "We need something more functional." Functional? My kitchen had served me perfectly fine for 30 years. Sure, the linoleum floors were worn, and the cabinets weren't exactly Pinterest-worthy, but they were mine. They were part of my story. I told her no. Firmly. Politely. But no. Cassidy didn't take kindly to being told no. Her voice turned icy as she snapped, "Margaret, this isn't your house anymore. You gave it to Daniel, remember? So stop acting like you have any say in what happens here." Those words hit me like a slap across the face. I wanted to scream, to argue, to remind her that technically, legally, the house was still in my name. But instead I swallowed my anger and walked away. For now. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying Cassidy's words in my head. Was she right? Had I given up my claim to this house when Daniel grew up? Oh, absolutely not. This house was mine, plain and simple. I hadn't signed anything over to him. It was just assumed, I suppose, that it would eventually belong to him. But assumptions aren't laws. The next morning I decided to talk to Daniel. Surely he'd understand. Surely he'd stand by me. Wrong. When I brought it up, Daniel sighed and rubbed his temples like I was giving him a headache. "Mom, Cassidy's just trying to help. She thinks updating the house will increase its value. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" His tone stung worse than Cassidy's accusations. Here I was, fighting for my home, and my own son dismissed me like I was some stubborn old lady clinging to relics of the past. Fine. If that's how they wanted to play it, then so be it. I wasn't going to back down. It happened quickly, almost too quickly for me to process. One day I came home from running errands to find all my belongings packed into boxes and stacked neatly in the guest room. My favorite armchair, the one I used to rock Daniel to sleep in, was gone, replaced by one of Cassidy's minimalist monstrosities. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the chaos, until Cassidy appeared behind me. "I moved your things," she said coolly. "You'll be more comfortable in the guest room anyway. Less clutter." Clutter? My life's possessions reduced to clutter? I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could speak she added, "And please stay out of the main areas of the house unless we invite you. We need space to work." Space. In my own home. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How dare she? How dare either of them? That night, sitting alone in the cramped guest room surrounded by boxes, I made a decision. Enough was enough. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about respect. About standing up for myself. I rummaged through the attic until I found the old documents proving the house was still legally mine. Seeing my name on those papers filled me with a strange mix of relief and rage. Relief because I knew I had power. Rage because I'd let things get this far without using it. The next morning I called Martha Reynolds, my neighbor and closest friend. Over coffee I showed her the documents and laid out my plan. Martha listened quietly, her eyes narrowing as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Well, Margaret," she said, "looks like it's time to show them who's boss." Martha became my unofficial strategist. She suggested hiring a lawyer to formalize my ownership rights, just in case Cassidy decided to fight dirty. Meanwhile, I started documenting every interaction with her. Every snide comment, every passive-aggressive move. I even took photos of the changes she'd made to the house, cataloging each alteration like evidence in a crime scene investigation. But beyond the practical steps, Martha reminded me to focus on maintaining my dignity. "Don't stoop to her level," she warned. "Stay calm, stay classy, and let the facts do the talking." Easier said than done, of course, especially when Cassidy continued treating me like an intruder in my own home. Still, I followed Martha's advice. I bided my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the days passed, I noticed cracks forming in Daniel and Cassidy's relationship. Daniel seemed uneasy, caught between loyalty to his wife and guilt over abandoning me. One evening, I overheard them arguing in hushed tones. "She's your mother, Cassidy," Daniel hissed. "You can't treat her like this." Cassidy shot back, "And she can't act like she owns the place. She gave it to you, didn't she?" Their voices trailed off, but the damage was done. Hearing Daniel defend me even slightly gave me hope. Maybe he wasn't completely blind to Cassidy's manipulations. Maybe, just maybe, I could count on him to help mend this mess once the dust settled. Cassidy must have sensed I was plotting something, because she doubled down on her efforts to assert control. She installed new locks on the doors, claiming it was for security reasons. She banned me from hosting my weekly book club meetings, saying the noise disrupted her creative process. Creative process? Please. The woman barely spent 5 minutes in the house without complaining about something. In response, I began subtly reclaiming my territory. I invited friends over anyway, under the guise of catching up. I left notes around the house reminding everyone whose name was on the deed. And whenever Cassidy tried to intimidate me, I met her gaze head-on, refusing to flinch. Slowly but surely I was wearing her down. Then came the bombshell. While organizing some old files, I stumbled upon a letter addressed to Daniel from Cassidy. At first glance it looked innocent enough, just another piece of correspondence. But as I read through it, my blood ran cold. Cassidy had written about selling the house once renovations were complete, using the profits to fund her dream project, a chain of boutique interior design studios. My hands trembled as I folded the letter and tucked it safely away. So that was her endgame. All this talk about modernizing the house wasn't about improving our lives. It was about lining her pockets. Betrayal burned in my chest like acid. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was theft. And I wasn't about to let her get away with it. The next morning, I marched into the office of Harrison and Klein, one of the most reputable law firms in town. My friend Martha had recommended them, and as I sat across from attorney Rachel Klein, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, I felt a surge of determination. "I need to protect my property," I said firmly, sliding the deed and Cassidy's letter across her desk. Rachel scanned the documents, her expression unreadable. When she finally looked up, there was a glint of admiration in her gaze. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "you've got quite the case here." She explained that since the house was still legally mine, Cassidy's actions constituted trespassing at best and fraud at worst. Hearing those words sent a shiver down my spine, not out of fear but out of vindication. For weeks I'd been tiptoeing around her, letting her bully me into submission. But now the tables were turning. Rachel advised filing a formal notice asserting my ownership rights while preparing for potential litigation if Cassidy refused to back down. As I left the office, clutching a folder full of legal paperwork, I felt like a warrior heading into battle. This wasn't just about reclaiming my home anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity. News travels fast in small towns like ours. By the end of the week, Whispers about the feud between me and Cassidy had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some people sided with me, calling Cassidy a gold digger who didn't respect family values. Others defended her, saying I was being unreasonable and clinging to the past. Either way, the gossip made both of us pariahs, at least temporarily. To make matters worse, Cassidy retaliated by hosting a dinner party without inviting me. Through the thin walls of the guest room, I could hear laughter and clinking glasses. It stung hearing them celebrate while I sat alone, nursing a cup of tea. But instead of wallowing, I decided to fight fire with fire. The following day, I attended a town council meeting where local preservationists were discussing historic homes. During the Q&A session, I stood up and shared my story, not naming names, of course, but making it clear that someone was trying to erase decades of history from my beloved home. The room erupted in applause and several neighbors approached me afterward, offering support. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Cassidy's reaction to the public spotlight was swift and brutal. She confronted me the next morning, storming into the guest room like a hurricane. "What the hell do you think you're doing, dragging our private issues into the open?" she hissed, her face flushed with anger. I crossed my arms and met her glare head-on. "Our private issues? Cassidy, you've been treating me like I'm invisible for weeks. If you wanted privacy, maybe you shouldn't have tried to kick me out of my own house." Her lip curled into a sneer. "This is Daniel's house now, Margaret. You gave it to him years ago." That lie, the same lie she'd been peddling all along, was the final straw. Without hesitation, I pulled out the deed and waved it in her face. "Read it, Cassidy. My name is right there. This house belongs to me, not Daniel, and certainly not you." Her confidence faltered for a split second, but then she regained her composure. "Fine," she spat. "But don't think this is over." Later that evening, Daniel knocked on the door of the guest room. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened and his hair disheveled. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, sitting down heavily on the edge of the bed. For a moment, I thought he'd finally come to his senses, that he'd apologize and promise to fix things. Instead, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, Mom, I know Cassidy has been difficult, but she's my wife and I love her. Can't we find a way to compromise?" "Compromise? After everything she'd done?" I shook my head, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "Daniel, I've already given her every chance to treat me with respect and she's chosen not to. So here's the deal. Either Cassidy leaves this house peacefully or I'll evict her myself, with the help of the courts if necessary." His eyes widened in shock. "You wouldn't." "Oh, but I would." And he knew it. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, Martha dropped another bombshell. While chatting with her son, who happened to work in city planning, she'd learned that Cassidy had forged signatures on several renovation permits. Apparently, she'd bypassed proper channels to expedite the changes she wanted to make to the house. Armed with this new information, I called Rachel immediately. "This is exactly what we needed," Rachel said, her voice tinged with excitement. "With this evidence, we can force Cassidy to leave without going to court. All we have to do is present it to her privately and give her a choice: walk away quietly or face criminal charges." As much as I wanted to see Cassidy humiliated publicly, I agreed that resolving this privately might be the smarter move. Besides, I didn't want to drag Daniel through any more drama than necessary. It was time to bring this charade to an end. The showdown took place in the living room, a space that had once been filled with warmth and laughter but now felt cold and hostile. Cassidy stood near the fireplace, her arms crossed defensively, while Daniel hovered awkwardly in the corner. I entered carrying the folder of evidence, my heart pounding but my resolve unshakable. "Cassidy," I began, placing the documents on the coffee table, "we need to settle this once and for all." She glanced at the papers, her lips tightening into a thin line. "What is this nonsense?" she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual bravado. I leaned forward, my tone icy. "These are copies of the forged permits you submitted for the renovations. If you don't vacate this house within 48 hours, I'll turn these over to the authorities, and trust me, they won't take kindly to fraud." For a moment she looked like she might argue, but then something inside her seemed to crumble. Her shoulders slumped and tears welled up in her eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just wanted to prove myself, to show everyone that I'm capable of building something amazing." Her vulnerability caught me off guard, but I didn't soften. Then prove yourself somewhere else, I replied firmly. Not here. Not at my expense. After Cassidy packed her bags and left, the house felt eerily quiet. Daniel stayed behind, guilt written all over his face. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said, his voice trembling. I should have listened to you from the beginning. I hugged him tightly, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. It's okay, sweetheart, I murmured. We'll figure this out together. Over the next few days, we worked side by side to restore the house to its former glory, or at least close to it. We repainted the walls, repaired the damage from Cassidy's renovations, and brought back some of the old furniture she'd banished to storage. Slowly but surely, the house began to feel like home again. Once the dust settled, I realized how much I'd changed during this ordeal. I wasn't the same woman who'd let Cassidy walk all over me. I'd found my voice, my strength, and my courage. To celebrate, I threw a small gathering for friends and neighbors, thanking them for their support. As we laughed and reminisced, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, for the people who stood by me, for the lessons I'd learned, and for the house that had survived it all. In quiet moments, I often found myself reflecting on what had happened. Cassidy's betrayal had hurt, yes, but it had also taught me the importance of standing up for myself, even when it meant risking relationships. At the same time, I understood why Daniel had struggled to choose between his mother and his wife. Love is messy, complicated, and sometimes blind. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding a way to move forward without bitterness. With the house restored and tensions eased, I decided to embrace change. Not Cassidy's kind of change, but my own. I updated a few things here and there, adding modern touches that complemented the house's charm. I also started volunteering at the local library, reconnecting with parts of myself I'd neglected over the years. Life felt lighter, brighter, and full of possibilities. Just when I thought the drama was behind me, Cassidy reappeared one rainy afternoon. She knocked hesitantly on the door, looking smaller and less intimidating than I remembered. "Margaret," she said softly, "can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I invited her in. Over tea, she confessed that losing the house had forced her to confront her insecurities and failures. Then, to my astonishment, she proposed a partnership, turning the house into a bed and breakfast that combined her design skills with my hospitality instincts. At first, I laughed it off as absurd. But the more I thought about it, the more intrigued I became. Could this be a chance to rewrite our story, not as enemies but as collaborators? Cassidy's proposal lingered in my mind for days. On one hand, the idea of working with her again felt like stepping back into a minefield. Trust wasn't something I could rebuild overnight, not after everything that had happened. But on the other hand, her suggestion wasn't entirely without merit. A bed and breakfast could breathe new life into the house, preserving its charm while making it financially sustainable for years to come. I called Daniel and Martha to discuss it. Daniel was hesitant at first, understandably wary of reopening old wounds. "Mom, are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "She hurt you. Are you ready to forgive her?" It was a fair question, but forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, or excusing what she'd done. It meant choosing to move forward despite the pain. Martha, ever the pragmatist, encouraged me to consider the business angle. "If nothing else," she said, "it'll keep her on a leash. You'll have control over the terms, and if she steps out of line, you can shut it down." Her words made me smile. Maybe this wasn't just an olive branch. It was an opportunity to take back the power Cassidy had tried to steal from me. After weeks of negotiations, with Rachel acting as mediator, we finalized the partnership agreement. The terms were strict. Cassidy would handle the design and marketing, while I retained full ownership of the property and final say on all decisions. Any profits would be split evenly, but I reserved the right to dissolve the arrangement if she violated the terms. The transformation began slowly. Together, we renovated parts of the house, blending Cassidy's modern aesthetic with the timeless elegance of its original architecture. She surprised me with her creativity, finding ways to honor the house's history while updating it for modern guests. Watching her work, I saw a side of her I hadn't noticed before, a vulnerability and passion that reminded me of myself when I was younger. As the months passed, our relationship shifted. We weren't friends, not yet, but we found a rhythm, a fragile truce built on mutual respect and shared goals. Guests began arriving, charmed by the cozy rooms, homemade breakfasts, and stories of the house's rich history. For the first time in years, the house felt alive again. On a crisp autumn morning, I sat in the newly renovated living room, sipping tea and watching sunlight stream through the windows. The walls were adorned with family photos, some old, some new, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh paint. Cassidy bustled around nearby, arranging flowers for the weekend guests, while Daniel played chess with his son Ethan on the rug. For so long I'd feared losing this house. The physical space, yes, but also what it represented. My past, my identity, my legacy. But now, sitting here surrounded by laughter and warmth, I realized something important. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a vessel for memories, a place where lives intertwined and stories unfolded. And as long as those stories continued, the house would endure. Cassidy approached, holding a tray of cookies. "Here," she said, setting it down beside me. "Thought you might want these for later." Her tone was casual, almost friendly. I nodded, smiling faintly. "Thank you." It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I gazed around the room, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The battles fought, the lessons learned, the bridges rebuilt. Life is messy, unpredictable, and often painful. But it's also beautiful, resilient, and full of second chances. This house had taught me that. And maybe, just maybe, it had taught Cassidy too. In the end, owning something isn't about possession. It's about sharing your legacy. And that's exactly what I intended to do.